Strange tales told by a Dubliner. Be Turlock on me. Story number 2. Music from the coffin. Gusts of rain on the wind were lashing the windows as James Patrick O'Donoghue looked out of his house late on All Souls' Eve in the year 1827. For a year now he had been the teacher at the new school that had opened in Ballyfingal outside Dublin. In addition to his salary, he was given this house as a teacherage to live in. It was an old house on the edge of the village. The house was not in a very good state of repair, and it was too large for his needs, since he was not yet married and had no family or servants with him. Only a local housekeeper came in and cooked meals for him every noon and evening. He felt alone in the gloomy old house, especially on a night like this. There was a strong wind blowing outside, and he heard it when he was in his living room. Every so often there was a gust of rain, for rain was falling. He didn't envy any traveller out this night. Indeed, the country people especially avoided being out on All Souls' Eve, because they feared to meet the dead. It was said among them that on this night the souls of the dead rose from their graves and were granted one whole night to go back and visit their old homes. For that very reason, the country people on this night were wont to seek their beds early, but to leave a fire burning in the hearth, well banked up to last the night, and a table set with some food and drink, to welcome the family members returning from the beyond. The howling wind got in through cracks in the roof and window sashes, and on the mantelpiece before him the candles guttered in their sconces. All through the house there were intermittent sounds, what with doors and stairways creaking and the scurrying of rats in the wainscoting. The only comforting sound was the crackling of the fire of turf and wood in his fireplace, which did much to cheer the oppressive gloom of the place. O'Donoghue laid down the glass of hot whisky he'd been sipping, and turned with a sigh to his music. For music was his passion, Irish traditional music. He collected traditional tunes and songs, and he was an accomplished player of the uilleann pipes. He had a fine set of pipes which lay on the table beside him. He took them in his lap, attaching the armband of the bellows to his elbow and tying the broad leather strap on his thigh, where he then rested the chanter. He moved his elbow rhythmically, compressing the bellows to pump air into the bag, and as the plaintive sound of the instrument began to be heard, he played a slow air, working the drones and the chanter skillfully. When the last notes of the air had died away, he sat back in his armchair. The silence of the house engulfed him once again. He thought back to the time he had acquired these pipes, and couldn't repress a shudder of recollection. Aye, it was old Eugene Barry, the famous piper of Fingal, who had had them. He had heard the itinerant piper play at various locations in and around Dublin since he was a boy. Eugene Barry was an undisputed master at the instrument. He had a great store of old tunes, and he played them with consummate skill. Not only that, but he had a fine set of pipes that were something like 100 years old, and he never failed to attribute his music to the exquisite sound of them. James Patrick O'Donoghue took up the study of the pipes himself as a youth. He learned the technique of the instrument from a number of Dublin pipers and bought a half set of his own to practice on, as was the usual way with beginners. This way he learned the fingerding and became an able piper in his own right. When O'Donoghue moved to Ballyfingal to take up the post of teacher, he found that Eugene Barry was still living in the village, and several times he went to the local hostelry where the old man was wont to play in the evenings, when the humour was on him. Then Eugene Barry upped and died. Immediately, O'Donoghue thought of the old man's uilleann pipes. Here was an opportunity not to be missed. He'd buy them from the old man's estate, and then they'd be his. Fearing competition, he made discreet inquiries at the village inn after the funeral as to how the old man's property was to be disposed of, and was dumbfounded to hear that the pipes were not for sale. Eugene Barry had made a will in which he stipulated that his pipes, which he alone had played all his life, were to be buried in the coffin with him. The wishes of the dying man had been acceded to by the family, so there was no more to do. O'Donoghue went home a stricken man. When he was alone in the house, he gave full vent to his disappointment. He cursed and swore up and down at the pig-headed selfishness of the old man. It was one of the finest instruments he'd ever heard, and now it was to be played no more, left in the arms of a rotten corpse in the ground. The loss was too terrible, too pointless to think of. It was a criminal waste of a beautiful piece of craftsmanship and a master's instrument. Then a desperate plan began to form in his mind. He'd go to Ballyfingal graveyard himself and exhume the coffin. He'd open it and snatch the pipes from the dead man's cold grasp. He'd then replace the coffin in the depths of the earth, cover the grave over again, and take his prize home. And then the pipes would be his. O'Donoghue waited a couple of weeks to make sure that there wouldn't be any relatives going to the grave with flowers and candles and the like. Then he set out one crisp October night as the clocks were striking 2, wrapped in a mantle and a broad-brimmed dark hat, so that no man who might see him on the road would know who it was. He carried with him a stout shovel, a chisel, and a lantern. He made his way to the graveyard on the edge of the village. He paused in the lich gate to draw breath and gather his courage. Then he went in among the graves and soon found the freshly dug grave he was looking for. There was no headstone there as yet. They were waiting for the earth to settle. But there was a wooden cross, and by the light of his lantern he saw that on this cross was carved Eugene Barry, R.I.P. Without further ado, the teacher threw off his mantle and began to dig. Soon enough, he heard a sharp sound that told him he had reached the lid of the coffin. Shovelling away the rest of the earth, he exposed the crude wooden lid. Then, leaning over the edge of the grave, he brought forth his chisel and pried open the lid of the coffin. It yielded with a few creaking sounds and a bang. The teacher looked up and around him, fearing this noise would attract attention, but there was no one to be seen. Then, summoning his resolution, he removed the lid to one side. There in the box was the figure of Eugene Barry. The skin was leathery and fast decomposing, but the glassy eyes seemed to be staring at him horribly, in helpless hate. The pipes lay on the corpse's chest. O'Donoghue was thankful that the layers out had not sought to wind the corpse's arms around the instrument, for presumably rigor mortis had long set in before they placed man and pipes in the coffin together. Otherwise, he would have had to break the bony hands or arms to loosen their dead man's grip. No, the instrument lay loosely on top of the corpse, and the teacher was able to lift it out and put it in a leather bag he had ready. Then he hurriedly replaced the lid on the coffin, because he did not want to see what he read in Eugene Barry's dead staring eyes. He went to work with his shovel and soon had the grave filled in again. He stamped on the earth above the coffin to make it settle, and then did his best to smooth it over with his hands and replace the wreaths and flowers that had been left at the grave. Satisfied with his work, he put on his mantle and broad-brimmed hat, picked up his tools, and slung the bag with the instrument carefully over his shoulder. Then he left the graveyard and made his way homewards, and no man saw his going out or his coming in. James Patrick O'Donoghue came to love them pipes. It took a capable musician who understood the tradition to play them well, and what a satisfaction they were. Soon enough, his feelings of joy and pleasure in this instrument that was now his managed to smooth over any qualms of conscience he had about taking them from the dead man's grasp. The nocturnal expedition to the graveyard seemed like a dream now, and it was too horrible to think about, so he banished it from his mind. The wind was moaning in the rooftop as O'Donoghue rose to cast another few bits of turf and wood on the fire, which had been consuming itself on the hearth. Beside the grate, within reach, he had an ample gowall of turf from the haggard outside that would last him throughout the evening. Then, after a sip of his whisky, he sat down again, picked up his pipes, activated the bellows, and began to play a lively tune. He had been playing for some minutes when he heard a sound and stopped. It seemed to be a knocking on the front door. Surely this was not possible. No one with any sense would be out on a night like this. So he ignored it and resumed his playing. The knocking started again. He knew now he couldn't have been mistaken. Putting aside the instrument, he went out into the dark hall and advanced to the door. He was feeling his way, for there was no light there, or anywhere else in the house. It was all pitch black. When he left the warmth of his parlour, he was greeted by the cold air of the old house, and he could smell the damp and decay everywhere. God knows how many had lived in this house that was not his own, people of whom he knew nothing. He paused in the darkness, overcome by a feeling of desolate loneliness. He was aroused from it by another knock at the front door. Aye, he was suddenly cheered by the prospect of company, whoever this might be. With difficulty, O'Donoghue unbarred the rusty locks and opened the door. throwing it wide and looking out in curiosity to see if there really might be anyone there. As it happens, there was. He saw a tall but stooped figure in a long dark cloak, with the hood drawn up against inclement weather, and a top hat on his head, so that O'Donoghue couldn't see the man's face. "God save you," said O'Donoghue in surprise. "God save all here," replied a rather feeble voice. "I have been walking the roads, and the rain and the wind are bad. I'd be thankful if you'd let me sit a while by your fireside and warm myself and rest. And I fancied I heard music too. Perhaps you have company." "No," said the teacher, "I have no company, so you're welcome to come in. No man should be out on a night like this. It's not a fit night out for man or beast." He stepped aside and held the door wide open, and the visitor shuffled slowly in. Once inside, he took off his hat and shook the rain from it. The teacher led him into the parlour and showed him a seat by the fire. "Sit you down there," he said, "and if you have a mind, we'll have a hot whisky together." "Very kind of you," said the figure, going and sitting in the proffered chair, while the teacher busied himself with the kettle on the hob and the whisky bottle. When he turned to offer a steaming glass to the visitor, he found that the man had not taken off his hood or cloak, so that his face was still in shadow. The old parlour, with its high ceilings, was dark, in spite of the cheery fire in the grate. The two candles guttered atop the mantelpiece added little light to speak of. The guest in his armchair was outside that pool of light, and remained largely unseen in the exterior darkness. The wind whistled on drearily, eternally, out around the house, and finding its way in through a myriad of cracks in roof and walls, through draughty sashes that rattled, and a few old shutters that banged the rotten wood against the casements here and there. Only the warm, crackling fire served to keep the icy dampness at bay. "Here's a health to you," said O'Donoghue, raising his glass. The visitor raised his own glass in mute response, and drank deeply from it, emitting a sigh of satisfaction. The two men sat and drank in companionable silence for a while, the steam rising palely from their tumblers. Then the visitor, seemingly revived by the hot spirit he had tasted, said, "I heard the sound of music, pipe music." He seemed to smile. "Aye," said the teacher, "I was practising a few tunes when you came by, for I'm a piper in me free time." He indicated the pipes proudly. "Good, good," said the visitor. "I would love to hear a tune from you." "That you will then," said O'Donoghue, and he picked up his instrument, attached the armband from the bellows, rested the chanter on the leather strap he still wore, and pumped air into the bag. He began to play again where he'd left off. The man nodded his head and tapped his foot to the sound of the music. When it was finished, he said quietly, "Well done." "Have you a song or a tune for us yourself?" the teacher asked in the conventional manner, for every guest in the house was expected to do a turn. "I used to be a piper myself," the man said, "but I haven't played for a while." The teacher was surprised. "Well, there's the pipes, if you want to try them. See if you can knock a squeeze out of them." He disengaged himself from the instrument and handed them carefully to the other. The visitor accepted this offer without further ado and took the pipes in his lap. He seemed to sit hunched over the instrument for a time, as if he was studying it. Then he put the armband on and drew aside his cloak to rest the chanter on his knee. He slowly pumped air into the bag with the bellows and began to play. It was a slow air he played. His playing was of a superior sort, O'Donoghue found as he listened. What a mastery of the instrument! Why, the man played those pipes as if he'd always played them. He filled the room with the sound of his heartfelt playing. The parlour was dark. The storm outside could still be heard, but the soulful music seemed to come out of the endless darkness and join its voice with the shrillness of the wind. "Well done," said the teacher at the end, in admiration. "Let me give you another drop of the crater, and then maybe you'll give us another tune. For it's always the custom to follow a slow air with a fast tune, is it not?" The teacher took 2 empty tumblers and filled them with whisky, hot water, and a pinch of sugar. He handed one steaming glass to his silent guest and took the other himself. Again they drank deeply of the warming spirit, and again the visitor seemed to be aroused to a new liveliness. He put down his glass and arranged the pipes in his lap. "What will you play this time?" asked the teacher. The visitor thought for a while. "The Kilfinnan jig," he said. "I don't know that one myself," said the teacher. "There is a story to it," said the visitor. "It concerns Bishop Andrew Campbell, who was a bishop in County Cavan during the worst of the penal times. To escape the attentions of the redcoats, he used to travel about disguised as a wandering piper, for he had a set of pipes himself and knew well how to play. One time he travelled in his calling as far as Armagh. In a tavern in the town, he fell in with some redcoats, God's curse on them, and nothing would do them but that he should come to their barracks and entertain the whole regiment of them. Well, he did go, having no choice, and he played for them, and they danced and they drank his health, little knowing he was a bishop. If they had known him, you can be sure they would have hanged him there and then. But he got away unharmed. No one knew who the piper was." This is supposed to be the tune he played for them. He pumped air into the bag and started up a lively tune. The music emerged from the outer darkness, but it was stronger than the darkness, stronger than the storm outside. Finally the old piper stopped. "Wasn't that grand?" said the teacher, draining his tumbler and putting it down beside him. "And you say you don't play now? Why, if you're not playing the pipes, you should be." "I used to play," the old man replied sullenly, putting the instrument aside. "But I have no pipes now." "No?" I used to have a fine set of pipes, the finest there was, but they were stolen from me. Stolen? Aye, stolen. There was a silence that seemed to last an eternity. In that silence, the thunder could be heard outside now. And have you any idea who stole them from you? Asked the teacher. The old man rose out of his chair, and his hood fell back. Thunder rumbled again outside, and a flash of lightning illumined the scene. The teacher gasped. It was Eugene Barry, recognisable, but horribly disfigured, a blackened corpse. "You did!" he growled in fury. James Patrick O'Donoghue fell in a faint, but the last thing he remembered distinctly was Eugene Barry seizing the pipes, then bending over him with horrible staring eyes, his mouth crooked in a sneer of rage. He also drew the leather strap from his knee. Then he wrapped up all carefully inside his capacious cloak and drew up the hood so that his face was hidden again. Finally, he put on the top hat which had lain on the floor beside him. In a haze, in a swoon, O'Donoghue saw the tall figure sweep from the parlour and heard his footsteps in the hall. Then the front door opened, and the fury of the storm could be heard. Thunder and flashes of lightning, with rain gusting in. What a crash! The front door closed again, and the visitor had gone. Where to? The trembling, fainting teacher had no desire to guess. Yous have been listening to Music from the Coffin by Turlough Con Me from Strange Tales Told by a Dubliner. If you've enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, share and comment. And the best of the season to yous.